The Young and the Restless spoilers. The secret that Claire had guarded so carefully, the identity she had constructed like a fortress brick by brick, was beginning to crack. For so long she had carried herself with poise, calculating every move, controlling every breath she released in the Newman household so that no one would suspect the truth that lived beneath her surface. She had studied Victoria's every nuance, mirrored her gestures, absorbed her patterns until it seemed natural for her to call herself daughter. She had convinced the world of her place, stitched herself into the fabric of the family name, and silenced the whispers that had once questioned her bloodline. And yet no amount of preparation could withstand the moment when Cain Ashby looked at her with eyes sharp enough to pierce through her carefully woven disguise. Cain had always been a man who thrived in shadows, a survivor of betrayal and schemes, someone who understood the power of secrets better than anyone. For weeks he had been circling Claire, watching her movements, sensing something in the way she flinched when certain questions arose, in the way she pressed too hard to prove her loyalty. Where others were soothed by her soft-spoken pledges of family, Cain saw a mask. And then, finally, he found what he was looking for, a trace of her past, a thread that led back to the identity she had tried to bury. In his hands now was the weapon he needed, a truth sharp enough to cut her to pieces. When Cain confronted her, Claire felt the floor fall from beneath her. The composure she had maintained shattered in an instant, and the fury in her eyes was laced with terror. He had unearthed what she had sworn never to reveal, that she was not Victoria's child at all, that she had lived under another name, another life, and that life included a husband. Somewhere out there was a man who had once claimed her, and worse, a man who was still searching. She had hidden herself so deeply, changed her name, erased every trace, and yet Cain's words struck her like a knife. He knew. He knew, and he would not stay silent. The revelation left Claire trembling, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum of panic. She had believed her secret was buried, that even Reed's suspicion could not dig deep enough to uncover it. But Cain was different. He was relentless, opportunistic, and merciless. He did not care about her tears or the desperation in her voice. He cared only about the leverage this gave him, and in that moment Claire realized that her life, her identity, her fragile place in the Newman empire, now rested in his hands. Cain's threat was cold, clear, and devastating. If she did not bend to his will, he would bring her husband to Genoa City. He would let the truth spill out in the boardrooms and living rooms where the Newmans ruled, and every illusion she had crafted would collapse. Her claim to Victoria's love, her tentative bond with Nick, her fragile acceptance by Nicky, all of it would dissolve into betrayal once they discovered she had been living a lie. Worse still, her husband's arrival would drag with it the past she had fought so hard to bury, a past stained with fear and choices she could never explain away. The weight of the threat crushed her, and yet somewhere beneath the tears, fury ignited. Claire wept openly, the sobs breaking her voice, but in her heart there burned a rage at the injustice of it all. She had clawed her way into survival, reshaped her life, and tried to create something new for herself, only to find her efforts dismantled by a man who saw her pain as an opportunity. Cain's demand was not spoken aloud, but it lived in the silence between them. He wanted her loyalty, her obedience, perhaps even her betrayal of those she claimed to love. He wanted a pawn inside the Newman walls, a puppet to dance whenever he pulled the strings. And she, trapped by the fear of exposure, was forced to consider his terms. Claire cried until her body shook, the sound echoing through the halls that once made her feel safe, but in her mind a different war raged. Should she yield to Cain, sacrifice her dignity and her autonomy to protect her secret? Or should she defy him, knowing that defiance would unleash a storm that might obliterate her completely? She thought of Victoria, of the tentative bond she had built, and of Reed, who had already looked at her with suspicion in his eyes. If Reed discovered Cain's revelation, if he learned that she was not truly his sister but an impostor who had stolen her place, he would tear her apart in front of the entire family. And Victoria, could her mother's love survive such a betrayal? Or would she cast her out forever, banished with nothing left but the ghost of what she had once pretended to be? The cruelty of Cain's position was that he did not care either way. He thrived on the destruction of others, on pulling strings until they strangled those too weak to resist. His smirk, his calm certainty, made Claire want to scream. She hated him, hated that he had cornered her, hated even more that he had the power to do so. Her tears, though real, masked the depth of her anger. She would cry in front of him, because that was the role she was forced to play, but inside her soul burned with humiliation and a growing resolve that she would not remain his pawn forever. In that moment, Genoa City shifted once again. The game was no longer only about Reed's secrets or Victoria's heart, it was about Claire's very identity. Kane's discovery meant the stakes had risen beyond repair. A single word from him could unravel her completely, and every relationship she had worked to build would collapse like a house of cards. Yet even in her despair, Claire's mind sharpened. If she could endure this, if she could outmaneuver him, perhaps there was a way to survive without surrendering everything. But if she failed, if Kane's threats materialized, then her life in Genoa City would end in ruin. And so she cried, broken in appearance, but beneath the sobs there was fire. Claire would not forgive, she would not forget, and though she was cornered now, the day would come when she would turn the blade back on Kane. For every threat he whispered, she would carve her own path toward freedom, even if it meant destruction. The war between them had only just begun, and Genoa City would pay the price when their secrets spilled into the open. She was furious in a way that did not flame outward but burned inward, a steady white heat that hollowed the air in her chest and made the smooth routines of each day feel like glass underfoot. And yet Claire understood there was no escaping the life she had stitched together unless she wanted it ripped apart in front of everyone she had worked so hard to convince. Survival demanded compromise, and compromise demanded an answer now. So she did what the cornered do when the trap closes and the jaws are already biting down. She agreed to Kane's secret. She agreed because the alternative was annihilation, because the past she had buried would be dragged into the bright rooms of Genoa City and named, because the lie that kept her safe would be pronounced a lie in the mouths of people who would never forgive her. The agreement did not sound like a bargain so much as a sentence read out with calm precision. She would feed him the currents that moved behind the walls of Newman, she would become the quiet tide that eroded Victor's footing grain by grain, she would carry signals between rivals without leaving fingerprints, and in return Kane would keep his knife sheathed and the man hunting her, her husband, at bay. If she failed, he would open a door she could never close again. She gave him that assent without looking away, not as surrender but as a down payment on a future where she would outlive this humiliation and one day take back what he stole from her now. Yet the moment the word formed in her mind she felt the cost settle on her bones like winter. Kane had wanted a throne for longer than anyone knew, had tilted at Victor's empire with blunt force and smiling finesse and always, somehow, fallen short of ruling anything larger than his own appetites. But the dream did not die because men like him feed on the fantasy of arriving in a room and having everyone turn toward them with a hush of respect. He wanted to be the man people quoted, the man whose signature made markets shake, the man whose name was spoken softly in restaurants and loudly in boardrooms, the man who, when he walked into society or the athletic club, collected nods like tribute. He told himself that was leadership, that he would govern cleaner than Victor, fairer than Jack, fiercer than Billy, that he would be the axis around which Genoa turned, but the attitude he carried, sharp with condescension, quick to threaten, impatient with loyalty he hadn't earned, guaranteed that the homage he craved would curdle into compliance purchased by fear. None of that self-awareness touched him. He believed this was the moment finally engineered to deliver him the crown. He had mapped it as a campaign with phases and yields, isolate Victor's judgment by starving him of clean intel, inflame old rivalries between the Abbotts and the Newmans so every ally looked like a liability, seed the market with whispers that the patriarch had lost his edge, nudge a boardroom vote from confidence to interim review, and, when the structure wobbled, be there with a portfolio that suggested stability and a smile that promised nothing would change except who signed the orders. For that, he needed a lever inside Victoria's orbit that moved quietly and carried weight, and now he had one in Claire. The deal, when translated from thread into work, was simple in description and merciless in scope. Claire would surface the patterns that never reached press releases. The friction between Victoria and Nate over what constituted risk versus vision, the private concerns Nikki expressed about reputational exposure, the rotations of Victoria's calendar that signaled where capital and attention would migrate next, the anonymous briefings Nick sometimes commissioned to sanity check acquisitions, the moments when Reed's return unsettled strategy because personal life bled into corporate reflex. She would flag the meetings that mattered, the closed-door pre-briefs that always preceded the public agenda, the names on draft memos that revealed who was being elevated and who was being isolated. She would nudge conversations where Kane needed them nudged, a quiet question to a mid-level counsel about bylaws, a soft suggestion to a communications aide about timing, a raised eyebrow in front of the wrong person at the right moment to make them rethink an alignment. She would move one step beyond observation into orchestration by introducing delays where speed would help Victor and accelerants where patience would have blunted risk, a vendor suddenly needing one more compliance signature, a regulator conveniently asking for supplemental information the week a vote was scheduled, a rumor about a competitor's counteroffer seated in the exact corridor where it would reach an executive who could not resist gossip. And she would, when asked, signal vulnerabilities Kane could monetize, divestitures floating in back-channel conversations, talent poised to defect, philanthropic initiatives large enough to draw scrutiny if someone hinted they masked tax strategies. Kane demanded redundancies to prove her usefulness. A second set of credentials for a staging environment that mirrored production systems, a burner phone with check-in windows disguised as meditation reminders, a list of 3 journalists who would take anonymous calls if a story were gift-wrapped with enough verifiable detail. Every deliverable arrived wrapped in the same unspoken clause: miss any of this and the man you married will be standing in the lobby asking for you by a name this town has never heard. She stepped into that machinery because she saw no path around it, yet she carried into it a private calculation that curled tight and would not let go: confession as strategy. There was a version of the next week where she walked into Victoria's office and told the truth in one breath. Not the whole ledger, not the labyrinth of how she had crossed continents and erased herself and built a persona strong enough to stand in front of the Newmans without shaking, but the essential fact that would either end everything or save something: she had a husband. He was looking for her, she had chosen safety over marriage, and the woman standing in front of Victoria was trying to build a life that would not leave her hunted anymore. It was a path strewn with explosives, because if Victoria believed that the daughter she had claimed could hide a vow that binding, then all the softer lies would be reweighed and found heavier. If Victoria chose mercy, it would be a mercy walked back the instant those around her called it weakness. Claire looked down that path and then at the path she was already on and saw that both ended with her bleeding. The choice was about where the cut happened and who watched. Into that uncertainty walked Kyle, not with accusations but with the unnerving sensitivity of someone who sees when your smile is a fraction late and your posture is a degree too straight, someone who can tell the difference between distraction and dread. He had watched her grow steadier in Genoa City and then, without warning to him, watched that steadiness tremble, and the questions he didn't voice were heavier than the ones anyone else dared to ask. The city has a way of magnifying secrets the moment they are shared even with a single person, and Claire discovered quickly that the circle of knowledge had widened beyond anything she intended, not because she spoke but because pressure leaves residue that other ambitious souls can read like fingerprints on glass. Audra noticed the micro-hesitations near the subject of legacy planning and drew a line from them to a theory about succession shored up by external influence. Phyllis caught the phantom of a surname whispered by a concierge who hadn't meant to say anything and carried that puzzle away like a cat with a ribbon: Billy. Forever nosing at fractures he can leverage for a storyline that puts him above the people he wants to beat. Overheard Kane on a call at the athletic club and did the math that tied Claire in volatility and an approaching storm, and Reed, less detective than Son but exquisitely tuned to the falseness that creeps into rooms where love and fear share air, sensed in Claire a tension that confirmed everything he already suspected and nothing he could yet prove. Secrets do not remain singular in Genoa City, they sprout imitators and shadow stories, and before Claire could isolate the contagion, versions of her truth were drifting through lounges and back offices in text threads that burned as soon as they were read. Victoria felt it before she learned it, the way mothers know when the room has shifted because their child's eyes are a little too bright, a little too flat, and the distance between sentences fills with a soundless plea. She watched Claire move through the day with a precision that normally meant control and now looked like a woman trying to keep a dozen plates spinning while one of them already had a crack she couldn't ignore. Victor noticed it and catalogued it without sympathy, because the discipline of his life has always been to see fragility as something to guard against rather than to cradle, and he filed the observation under risk until it could be weaponized or dismissed. Nate noticed and tried to fold his concern into strategy, because love for him is often indistinguishable from the desire to fix the variables that make other people hard to manage. Nikki noticed and prayed through it the way she prays through every new tremor, with a private courage that does not need to announce itself to count. Kyle did not pray or strategize, he worried. He worried because Claire flinched when a number she didn't expect lit her phone, because she kept a small jewelry box in the back of a drawer and never opened it, because he found a foreign ATM receipt in a side pocket of her bag from a city she didn't claim to have visited, because a news alert about a missing person in a state 2 time zones away made her stare too long and breathe too shallow. He worried because when he said her name softly in the corridor one afternoon she didn't answer at first, and when she did the look in her eyes had nothing to do with him and everything to do with running. Kane, satisfied that the gears were turning, began pressing for visible returns that would inch him closer to the fantasy he called inevitability. He wanted an early raid on a philanthropic anchor project that Victoria was preparing to announce, not because he cared where the money went but because a hint of impropriety in a charity is a headline that sticks longer than a missed quarter. He wanted a sense of the board's appetite for advisory rotation, the kind of bureaucratic housekeeping that can be reframed as loss of confidence in a leader. He wanted a night of leak that would embarrass Victor without harming the company irreparably, a surgical cut that produced public blood and private leverage. To ensure obedience, he idled the threat most precisely, a caller ID she would recognize without ever having saved the number, a man with a voice that could freeze her on a sidewalk because it carried years of intimacy and the iron of control, a photograph taken last week on a street she thought he would never know, forwarded to Kane and then to her as proof that distances are porous. And because every tyrant worries not about failure but about defection, Kane dangled an allowance dressed as benevolence, cash to move money that cannot be traced back, transport arranged by a third party if she needed to be seen somewhere she wasn't, a promise that if she delivered him Victor's stumble he would let the husband drift back into the world and search in circles that never converge. The kindness was counterfeit, the leash was real. The question of confession did not go away, it gathered mass. Claire could not decide whether the fastest way to stop a rumor is to stand in front of it and name it, or whether, in a town that feasts on scandal, naming is simply an accelerant. Tell Victoria and she risks becoming the woman who betrayed twice, once by arriving under a story crafted for acceptance, and again by altering the story only when exposure was certain. Tell Kyle and she risks injuring the one person whose quiet attention has made her feel seen rather than studied. He would not punish her, not first, but his face would change and something uncomplicated would be gone. Tell no one and she continues to live with the siren in her pocket and the dread that accompanies any knock on the door after 10. She weighed another variable that cut deeper than the rest, the marriage itself. It was not romance interrupted, it was control fled. There had been vows and there had been violence, not always physical but always enclosing, a tightening that left days narrow and nights wide awake, and when she slipped her ring off for the last time and put it in the velvet square she now kept in a hidden drawer, she had sworn to herself that no one would ever again be entitled to the geography of her life. To confess was to give that man back his shadow inside her house, to hide was to let Kane rent space in her mind. Between those evils she kept walking because the only way out she trusted was the one she could build with her own hands, slowly, invisibly, while everyone else